Alright, this is Tyler with TJX Survival, and I've been meaning to do a review of the SAZ, or Swiss Army Zippo knife. Now, normally I would take it out in the backcountry and use it in a bunch of videos and stuff, but I kind of wanted to do a discussion video on this one. I have made a bunch of videos of me doing trail running and starting impromptu fires, doing water purification stuff while up in the mountains, all with this knife. But what I've decided to do is just a little tabletop discussion about what makes a knife a bushcraft knife. Some of the things that I consider deal breakers for a bushcraft knife are whether or not it has a full tang. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't take a folding knife and use it as a survival knife. But to really call it a true bushcraft, true survival knife, it's going to have a full tang. Now, for those of you that don't know, what I mean by full tang is the blade is one solid piece of steel from the bottom of the pommel of the knife all the way to the tip. And the reason why that's important is because you do so much hard work with the bushcraft knife when you're prying hard on sticks or using it like a little hatchet, a little batoning type of hatchet. There's so many things that you do that you essentially abuse your knife with, that it's got to be able to stand up to that. Another thing I consider to be a deal breaker that it must have for a bushcraft knife is a 90-degree angle on the spine. Okay, and the reason is, if you're going to run a fire striker, which I dare say the vast majority of people will use, you got to have that 90-degree angle on the spine, and it can't be coated. If it's got some sort of coating, you have to remove the coating, otherwise you end up using your blade. Some knives, like the Tops Bob, has a striker on the bottom, which works, but I vastly prefer in my knife that it always have a 90-degree angle in the spine, which gives you the ability to throw out some solid sparks. Okay. Now, when you have that solid 90-degree angle on the spine, it essentially chips off bigger chunks of your procerium rod, and that's important. And in a second here, I'll start a little bitty fire and show you why that's important. Now, another thing that I prefer that is not a deal breaker, but it's a really nice thing to have, is a Scandinavian grind. And essentially, a Scandinavian grind is the exact same angle from the beginning of the grind all the way to the tip. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have a micro bevel at the very end, or that you don't have a Scandinavian grind that's finished off with a leather strop, which essentially puts the carbides in alignment. A leather strop will take a little bit of the metal off, but not very much. It's incredibly fine. Essentially what you're doing is polishing and aligning the carbides along that blade to refine it and make it hair popping sharp. Another thing that I really like to have in a bushcraft knife is this little gap right here. Okay. The reason why I like that little gap is because it gives me the ability, when I'm making a hand drill or other small tools, to sit it there and spin it on my spindle. The reason why that's important is if you have a pithy type hand drill, which basically means some sort of a hand drill that's made out of a stock that has pith in the middle, which is kind of like cork, this little point there gives you the ability to spin it and take that out. When you do that, it makes it so that your hand drill won't hang up on the middle with all this weight on the middle. When that happens, you're not getting all the friction brought on the outside, and it becomes less efficient. So that little tool, or that little hook right there, is really nice in giving me the ability to use that. The other thing, and the main reason that it's there, is it makes the knife easier to sharpen. When you're taking metal off doing your sharpening, essentially it's really hard to get it to a point down here at the base of the knife. Another thing I really like about this knife is the width. I'll get the statistics on this in just a second and tell you about that, but it's the perfect width for me. What I mean by that is, if you get a blade that's too wide, it has a tendency to split the wood as you're cutting it, and it makes it harder to push. If you get a blade that's too thin, it has a tendency to bend, warp, and break the blade. Now there's a time and a place for that. If you've got a fillet knife, that's great. Okay, you want your blade to bend so that it can go around the bones and fillet a fish. If you got a bushcraft knife or a survival knife, you don't want it to bend. You want it to be rigid so that you can use that back of that knife to scrape a bow, use the front to carve, notching, whatever it is that you're going to do. The most important thing that I think needs to be said about any knife: feels good in your hand. If it doesn't feel good in your hand, you're just not going to use it. This one's very smooth all over the outside, so that it's not going to blister me when I'm constantly making some sort of large project like a bow. And it's the right hand, it feels my hand just enough and not too much, so that it's easy to use, easy to skin with, easy to grasp. When you grab it, you know where it is, and you just feel it intuitively, so that you don't have to go searching for things. All right, so that's the reason that I like this knife. That's kind of a short list of the deal breakers. Essentially, if it doesn't have it, I don't like that knife, or I wouldn't consider it a bushcraft appropriate knife. Plus a couple of little things that I'd like to add that I personally like. So let me get some paperwork and give you the exact specifics on this knife. So forgive me for grabbing a piece of paper here, but I'm not a stats guy. I just don't memorize the stats on the knives. I prefer to get a hold of the knife, see the density of the steel when I sharpen it, try it out and see if it works. And if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. However, I know there are a lot of people out there that want to know the stats specifically on this knife. So I'm going to give you a little list of this stuff and kind of cover that in some semi-detail. This is 1095 high carbon steel. It's full tang, which we already discussed. It's the full length blade from the bottom to the top of the knife. Got a 3/16 inch thick blade. I know he specifically picked that blade thickness because of a little research that he did on should it be too thick or too thin. We already kind of covered about the reason that that's important, which is that if it's too thick, it doesn't cut well. If it's too thin, it breaks. It's got a Scandinavian grind. We already talked about that. It's a 9 3/4 inch overall length, 9.75 length. It's got a 5 1/4 inch blade. Very solid sized blade. It's got a little bit of length to it. 5 inch cutting edge, 4 1/2 inch black micarta scales, a little bit of gun blue finishing. It's got a lanyard hole, which is nice. On the original version of this, it was a little bit sharp on the inside, and it was cutting through some 550 cord. Fortunately, some of the demos that he's handed out, they've been able to fix that problem, so that was an initial problem we identified in the beginning. It's got a Kydex sheath that comes with a bunch of different colors. I really like the Kydex sheath. One of the deal breakers for me in a lot of knives is actually the sheath. The sheath is so horrible, I just don't buy the knife. Now, you can always make your own Kydex sheath, which I've done a lot in the past, but it'd be really great if they just had a base model that you can do things to, which he did with this knife. And I have added in another video, you'll see some of the modifications that I did. The things that I like about the sheath are that it's got a solid angle right here to run your thumb up. It makes it easier to pull it out. Okay, it's got a nice grip and a high grip on the handle without going too far and becoming too rigid to pull out. So it comes out nice and smooth, slides in and clicks. So it's very well made. One thing that I love that they did was the spacing on the sheath gives me the ability to use the tech lock. I really like the tech lock. For those of you that don't know what it is, I get them on bladehq.com. You can just flip this little switch right here, which is a lock that keeps it from going out accidentally. Push that button and slide it down. You can adjust it to whatever width that your belt is, which is really nice. You can swap it out for different belts, and when you adjust it, it keeps the blade from canting accidentally in the wrong direction. You just basically lock it, hold that down, and it is not coming undone. This thing's detachable too. You can just pop it out if it annoys you. But I leave it in there because it's a backup lock. That way you don't accidentally snag your sheath on something and lose it. Something that I added to this sheath is this other piece of Bolstex, which is Kydex. It's a knockoff brand of Kydex. The reason why I did that is I believe every good bushcraft knife should have some sort of a fire striker, either in a leather attachment or a Kydex attachment. And I put it right here where the angle of the sheath is, so that I can push this down in there and it's just not coming out on accident. Even when I give it a good solid yank, it's not going to come out. And then lastly, I took away extra material right here, which makes it so that as I tighten up these screws in the back, it locks down and clips onto itself. That way it closes more than the size of the striker, which is nice. So it's not gonna fall out. That is super handy to have with your knife. It just attaches right there. The reason why I added they had a little ring that was hanging from the top, and it just basically let it hang from your belt on your right or your left side. But I'm almost always carrying a gun with me, so I really prefer the scout carry or the neck knife. Anyway, I've got a neck knife almost all the time. I like carrying this in the scout position, which is the center of the back, so that I have a right side free for my pistol, a left side free for whatever I want to put over there, maybe a larger knife. And that gives me this good medium-sized knife that is small on my back, that's not going to get in the road. And I can just detach this tech lock, stick it right on my belt for my backpack, and just move it wherever I want. I can strap it onto a shoulder strap, put it wherever I want. Just adjust the inside and it will stay nice and solid. Some people say, why do you baton with a knife? I say, why do you have a knife you can't baton with? I think it's important to have that as an option because you won't always have a hatchet. Yeah, a hatchet's way better at splitting wood than batoning, but most of the time you only have a knife. When I trail run in the backcountry high in the mountains, the only thing I bring is a knife like this, and oftentimes it's this knife. I can't baton with a hatchet that I don't have, so it's important to know that the knife that you do have can baton. This is just a couple chunks of wood. They're small. This is going to be easy to baton with this. I just am doing this as a demonstration. What you do is pick the crack in the wood that already exists, stick your knife inside of that, and if it doesn't have a crack, it'll still work. And this is where it's important to hold loosely on the back because it'll shock your fingers. And just grab another log, pound away at it. Okay? You don't have to completely sink it all the way through. You can slide this forward and then just pound on the tip and the back till it sinks it through, right? Now the Scandinavian grind is arguably the best grind to cut wood. That's why they use it. The problem with the Scandinavian grind is oftentimes it doesn't stay as sharp. What I've found to help it stay as sharp is a full Scandinavian grind with just a little bit of a micro bevel on the tip, and I put the micro bevel there with a piece of leather strap or stropping. What that does is it gives it a micro convex grind at the tip, and a convex grind is 300 to 400% more effective in retaining strength, meaning it doesn't roll as much as a Scandinavian grind because it's not as brittle, right? But it's not as sharp. So this isn't the best piece of wood to make feather sticks with, but as an example here, you know, I'm just going to show you a little bit there. This is an incredibly dry piece of wood. I'm not going to feather stick the whole thing, but basically you cut on one side, you cut on the other side, one side, and the other side. And what you're going to do is you're just going to keep cutting up and work your way up until you have a very feathered out piece of wood. Now if you've got some birch or some softer wood than whatever this is, I think this is, what is this? I think this is quake and aspen, which is kind of a soft wood, but anyway, if you have a really soft wood, you can make really small curlies. This is incredibly dry, which means it's going to burn well. So the Scandinavian grind makes that type of a cut very, very well. That's why it's incredibly nice to have a Scandinavian cut knife to create feather sticks. Another thing you want to be able to have this 90-degree angle for in the back is for scraping, grinded here and flat here. So having that 90-degree angle on the back of the knife is a good way to create a bow, a good way to clean stuff up, scrape things loose. I'm not going to make a full fire, I'm just going to show you why it's nice to have this striker. If you just basically use your knife as a draw knife, you can pull all this internal stuff off. Sometimes it'll just peel. and that makes an incredible nesting material. If you're in a survival situation, you want to try and start your fire with just the striker before you use up that petroleum jelly and cotton in the back. If that doesn't work, just go straight to the petroleum jelly and cotton. So I'll try it real quick. Put your hand down. Don't throw your knife at the kindling because you have a tendency to knock it out of the road. What you do is you scrape a little pile of the shavings off the back of your striker. Okay? And I'll scrape the back like that and then roll it over. Pull your striker back. Yeah, I bumped it like I'm not supposed to. Okay? Pull it back. And it'll catch. We got fire right there. Okay? So I'm going to put that out. Now, if I tried like an ounce harder, obviously we would have fire, but I want to show you how well the petroleum jelly works in the back. So you only need a pinch, and I mean just a little pinch. Just enough that it covers the surface area of 2 fingers being pinched together. And that way you're not using it all up. But this is going to start very well. And take the stuff and spread it out really well. You want these little fibers to be exposed. Okay? Set them down like that. You can add some more of these shavings off the back, which I like to do. And they will just have secondary fires that they'll start. And then just pull it off. Starting my other one. And there's my fire. And it's really nice to have petroleum jelly and cotton available on your knife. So the only thing I would do to add to this knife is put a fire striker on it. Now that's going to make it cost more if they do that at the manufacturers. So I'm sure I'm assuming that's why it's not doing it. But that's too easy. Anyone can make it happen. So anyway, this has been a quick little demonstration of the SAZ or the Swiss Army Zippo knife. A couple of modifications that I've done to it. Absolutely one of my favorite knives. Light enough for a neck knife. Set up that you can use it as scalp or your right or left side. Very versatile. Has all of the deal breakers so that it's not a deal breaker that I would consider to make it a bushcraft knife. Has everything that you need and then some. If you want one of these, people have been blowing up my page with requests on this. If you want one of these, go over to the Swiss Army Zippo channel. Swiss Army Zippo. Send him a message for the SAZ knife and he will hook you up with a knife. Alright, thank you for watching. If this has been valuable, please share, please comment, please like, please subscribe. And you have any questions, shoot me a message. I do my best to get back to it as soon as possible. And I will reply to your message as soon as I can. Thank you for watching TJAS Survival.